The private dining suite on the 47th floor was built to intimidate. Velvet drapes in muted gold, a table cut from a single slab of Carrara marble, and a panoramic city view that reflected across the polished surfaces like a second, colder skyline. Everything inside seemed curated to signal wealth, privacy, and finality. The kind of room where signatures happened. The kind of room where people lost fortunes without realizing it. The sheikh sat at the head of the table, pen already balanced between his fingers. His entourage stood behind him, silent, rectangular silhouettes in tailored charcoal suits, guarding not his life, but his reputation. They never looked at the waitress when she refilled water or passed beside them carrying silver trays. No one ever looked at her. Her name was Layla. She moved quietly, almost frictionless, as if practiced in the art of avoiding collision with power. Her posture carried a softness mistaken for insignificance. The catering manager had told her merely to pour, smile, leave. Nothing more. Certainly nothing like what she was about to do. Across the table, two European consultants prepared a leather-bound folio. Inside it lay the contract, a $280 million acquisition agreement for a rare manuscript collection, allegedly dated to the 9th century. They spoke with the confidence of men who believed their performance was flawless, and the sheikh, leaning back, seemed moments away from sealing it. Layla passed behind him to clear a set of empty porcelain cups. As she did, she caught a glimpse of the illuminated page displayed on the tablet before the experts. She froze, not visibly, but internally, the way a diver pauses before surfacing. Her eyes traced the ink strokes, the spacing, the rhythm of the script. Something was wrong, very wrong. The sheikh raised the pen. Layla whispered, in flawless, classical Arabic, a single phrase that cut through the room like a dropped blade. Do not sign. The pen stopped mid-air. The consultants blinked, confused. The entourage stiffened. The sheikh slowly turned, stunned not only by the message, but by who had spoken it. She placed the cups down, hands trembling almost imperceptibly, unsure whether she had just saved a fortune or destroyed her life. He stared at her walking away, unable to understand how he had missed someone like her. The silence after her warning didn't merely stretch, it tightened. It tightened around every throat in the room. One of the consultants, thin, angular, with the everlasting smirk of a man who believed the world owed him applause, leaned forward and forced a chuckle. A waitress trying to give legal advice, he murmured to the room, in a clipped, amused tone meant to dissolve the moment. Adorable. The sheikh didn't laugh. His entourage exchanged nervous micro-glances, unsure whether they should intervene or pretend nothing had happened, but the consultant doubled down, switching to a Gulf dialect in a tone sharp enough to cut. Little one, your job is to pour tea, not to speak when men are deciding things. Layla felt the sting of humiliation bloom across her chest, a heat she could not express. Not here. Not now. For a second she considered staying silent, letting the moment pass, letting her life continue as the predictable, quiet corridor it had always been. But something inside her rebelled. She turned to the consultant, and with a steadiness she did not recognize as her own, she answered him in the same dialect, then seamlessly flowed into classical Arabic, so polished, so precise that even the sheikh straightened. Every syllable landed like a measured tap on stone. I spoke because danger was placed before you. I spoke because no one else saw it. The room froze. The consultant blinked once, twice, bewildered, not by her defiance, but by her command of a register he himself could not produce without betraying modern intrusions. The sheikh's eyes narrowed, not in anger, in recognition. He addressed her softly, in his own dialect, gentler, curious. What did you see? All heads turned to her, spotlighted, exposed, The worst position for someone who had built her life on being invisible. Layla's throat tightened. She had never spoken to a man like him directly. Not in a room like this. Not with stakes like this. She knew one wrong sentence could end her employment, jeopardize her visa status, and send her back into the void she had been crawling out of for years. Behind her, the city flickered with indifferent lights. Ahead of her, a contract worth $280 million sat waiting to swallow a powerful man whole. She inhaled. She chose truth. Sometimes the smallest voice is the one that rearranges the room. Layla steadied her breath, but inside she was a storm. Fear, memory, calculation, all colliding at once. She had spent years training herself to shrink, to fold in, to become the kind of woman people looked past. Survival had demanded it. Being noticed meant being questioned, and being questioned meant paperwork, proof, documents she didn't always have, or couldn't always afford to renew. She hadn't always been a waitress. Once she had been a graduate student specializing in early Arabic manuscripts, syntax patterns, vellum aging, ink oxidation curves, marginalia behavior. But when her scholarship collapsed under a bureaucratic delay, everything else collapsed with it. Her housing, her status, her sense of direction. Each debt pulled another thread loose. Eventually, she took whatever work she could find, anything that paid cash and didn't require her to explain why she no longer had a university ID or stable residence. Invisible work was safer. So she cultivated invisibility like a craft. Soft voice, lowered eyes, perfect politeness, the ability to pass through rooms without vibrating the air. The catering manager had once complimented her on being practically silent, as if that were a virtue rather than the evidence of disappearance. And yet, for all her efforts to vanish, the manuscripts never left her. She still read scans on her phone late at night, deciphering scripts as a kind of private devotion, a way to stay tethered to the version of herself she once hoped to become. But now, here in this room, this opulent, high-stakes chamber where men signed contracts worth more than entire university budgets, her past and present had collided. The sheikh watched her with unsettling focus. "You recognized something," he said. Not a question, an invitation she feared to accept. Layla swallowed. "I recognized an anomaly." The consultants exchanged smirks, performing amusement for the entourage. One whispered, in another Gulf dialect meant only for them, something belittling about educated migrant women and their fantasies of expertise. Layla heard it. She always heard everything. But she kept her expression neutral, anchored by a single truth. She had seen what they hadn't. She also knew something else. If she walked out now, they would continue without her. The contract would be signed, and the sheikh would lose more than money. He would lose legacy, credibility, the very thing these manuscripts were meant to secure for him. Her stomach twisted. The catering manager, having sensed tension, whispered for her to step out and let the important people handle their business. But as she turned to leave, the sheikh lifted a hand, not commanding, but requesting. "Stay," he said, "just until I understand what troubled you." The consultants' faces tightened. They didn't want her there. That alone told Layla she couldn't go. She remained by the wall, uncertain, exposed, heart racing. Sometimes being invisible is just another form of being trapped. Layla stood near the far wall, hands clasped behind her apron, pretending stillness she did not feel. The catering manager hovered by the door, torn between calling her out again or pretending she no longer existed. Ultimately, he withdrew. Status had spoken, and status in this room was not his. The consultants seized the moment. "Your Excellency," the one with the angular jaw began smoothly. "Our team has vetted every page of the collection. Provenance confirmed, ink dating consistent, and the structural composition of the vellum aligns with the historical period. We have spared no expense." He spoke with the confidence of a man who relied more on presentation than precision. His partner opened the leather folio, revealing the printed contract: crisp ivory paper, embossed header, discreet watermark. It was meant to convey legitimacy through weight alone. "We'd like to walk you through the highlights," he said, "for your peace of mind." Layla recognized the tactic: overwhelm with detail, bury the danger beneath an avalanche of curated facts. She felt her pulse climb, but she kept still. She had no authority here, only knowledge, and knowledge alone was a fragile shield. The lights dimmed slightly as the consultants cast the manuscript scans onto the wall screen. Page after page glowed with ornate calligraphy, gold leaf illuminations, and meticulous binding marks. The entourage shifted, quietly impressed. Even the sheikh leaned in, drawn to the antique beauty. Layla saw something else. She saw the hesitation in certain pen curves, the irregular pressure at phrase endings, the telltale micro-breaks where modern styluses often faltered before lifting. She noticed them instantly, muscle memory from years of analyzing ancient hands versus trained contemporary imitators. But she said nothing. Not yet. The consultants continued their performance. "This," the smirking one said, pointing at a decorative margin flourish, "is a signature motif unique to the atelier that produced the 9th century codices of Damascus. A hallmark of authenticity." Layla's nails pressed into her palms. The flourish wasn't wrong. It was too right. Perfect replication was its own confession. She knew this. They didn't. The sheikh, noticing her tension, paused the presentation. "You're seeing something again," he said quietly. Her breath caught. I need to watch the rest," she replied, careful not to overstep. He nodded once. "Then you will." The consultants stiffened, their choreography disrupted. And so, against every instinct that had kept her safe all these years, Layla stayed, forced to sit through the performance of a deception she already feared was monumental. Sometimes the longest path is the one taken by those who have nowhere else to stand. The consultants resumed their presentation, though the easy rhythm they once commanded now faltered. Each time the sheikh glanced toward Layla, their certainty thinned. Power, they suddenly realized, had shifted to the least expected corner of the room. "We'll proceed," the angular one said, his voice clipped. "Let's review the codicological assessments." He swiped to a high-resolution scan of the manuscript's opening folio. The illumination shimmered, a perfect balance of cobalt and gold, the kind that made collectors lean forward and scholars exhale. But Layla didn't admire it. She studied the spacing between two lines of text, the first line descending slightly too smoothly, the second rising with a precision unfamiliar to 9th century craftsmen. A modern hand, no matter how practiced, often revealed itself in geometry rather than beauty. The consultants, oblivious, narrated their script. The pigments have been tested for mineral consistency. The gold leaf demonstrates correct age fracturing. The binding threads. Layla stiffened. Binding threads. Her eyes locked on the image, on the seam, on the microscopic tension she knew should not be there. She felt her pulse surge, an internal alarm only trained eyes could trigger. The sheikh noticed. "You reacted," he said. Both consultants turned sharply toward her, irritation radiating from them like heat from a spotlight. "Your Excellency," the angular one said, maintaining a veneer of civility. "With respect, she is a waitress. She has no qualifications relevant to—" Layla spoke softly, but her voice carried to the far corners of the room. "I know what a 9th century seam is supposed to look like." The second consultant exhaled dramatically. "And what would you know about manuscript seams?" Layla hesitated. Revealing her past was dangerous. It invited questions. It exposed the fractures of her life she had spent years hiding. But she also knew something crucial. Silence was exactly what the fabricators were counting on. "I studied them," she said finally. Before my life changed." The sheikh leaned forward, curiosity sharpening. "You have academic training?" Layla nodded once. "Philology, manuscript forensics, paleography." The consultants exchanged a glance. One of those tight, silent looks meant to coordinate strategy. A look that said, "She's a threat." The angular one forced a smile. "Your Excellency, manuscript forensics requires specialized equipment, labs, spectrometry. She cannot possibly—" She recognized anomalies with her eyes alone, the sheikh said. "That already makes her more useful than your machines." Silence cracked the room. Layla lowered her gaze, not out of fear, out of the overwhelming strangeness of being defended, protected, seen. The sheikh gestured for the next page. As the scan appeared, a dense, ornate passage with interlaced diacritics, Layla felt the full weight of the trap unfolding. Not just a forged manuscript, something larger, something engineered. She inhaled slowly. Sometimes the truth begins with a single seam that refuses to lie. The next slide filled the wall with a breathtaking double-page spread. Emerald borders, gold-threaded vegetal motifs, script flowing like water carved by time. The entourage murmured in admiration. Even the sheikh softened, the beauty pressing against his defenses. But Layla felt dread settle behind her ribs. Perfection was the first red flag. True 9th century manuscripts were beautiful, yes, but never flawless. Time introduced irregularities. Ink dried unevenly. Artisans made minute adjustments with each line. Even the most skilled hands were still human. This was machine precise. The consultants resumed their performance, now speaking faster, as if trying to outrun scrutiny. "We conducted multispectral scans," said the second one, tapping the tablet. "No signs of artificial aging. All chemical profiles match the historical period. The investment is sound, Your Excellency." Layla studied the image again. Her eyes drifted to the margins, specifically to the tiny flourishes added during later centuries by scribes who annotated sacred works. But here, the marginal marks aligned too neatly with the text itself, as if added in the same sitting. A manuscript spanning centuries of hands, rendered with one voice. Her breath thinned. The sheikh saw it. "What is it now?" he asked gently, not with impatience, but with willingness, a rare thing in a room built to intimidate. Layla stepped closer, not to the table, but to the projected image. Her shadow grazed the gold borders. "The marginalia shouldn't echo the primary script," she said softly. The consultants laughed out loud, too loudly. The sound broke against the marble walls like cheap glass. "Oh, please," the angular one snapped. "She's talking about calligraphy wins, meaningless aesthetic notes." Layla turned to him, eyes steady. "Marginalia are like fingerprints. Different centuries leave different rhythms. This manuscript has only one rhythm." The angular consultant's expression darkened. "You have no access to our authentication data. You're guessing." "I'm remembering," she replied. The room tightened. The sheikh motioned for her to continue. The consultants froze, their performance unraveling. Layla exhaled, slow, careful, controlled. She could feel the invisible thread pulling her deeper, forcing her to acknowledge what she knew even before she consciously formed the thought. This wasn't an isolated forgery, it was a coordinated reconstruction. Someone with resources, serious resources, had engineered these pages to pass every superficial test and dazzle anyone who lacked deep historical instinct. The consultant sensed danger and pivoted. "Your Excellency," the second one said urgently, "let us not be distracted by amateur critiques. These manuscripts are accompanied by impeccable provenance records, and the contract safeguards your interests comprehensively." Layla's gaze snapped to him. Safeguards. A word chosen too quickly, too defensively. She stepped back, pulse spiking. She didn't know what was hidden in the contract, but she knew now, with chilling certainty, that the manuscripts were only half the trap. The other half was the fine print. Sometimes beauty is the exact shape a lie chooses to wear. The consultants sensed momentum slipping from their grip, and like seasoned performers, they shifted tactics. Out came the guaranteed reassurances, the soft diplomacy, the manufactured certainty of men trying to re-glue a narrative that was cracking at the edges. "Your Excellency," the angular one said, tone now syrupy with practiced calm. "Perhaps we should move to the contractual protections. You'll see the acquisition terms are extremely favorable." Layla's heart tightened. Of course they wanted to move on. The manuscript forensics was the battlefield where they were bleeding. The contract was where the trap waited. The sheikh glanced at the folio, then at Layla. "We'll finish the manuscript review first," he said. The consultants hesitated, one fraction of a second too long. Layla caught it. So did the sheikh. He leaned back, suddenly patient, suddenly dangerous. "Continue," he ordered. The second consultant swallowed and switched the display to a series of ultraviolet scans. The pages shimmered in layered blues and violets. Under this light, authentic manuscripts often revealed hidden repairs, marginal notes, ink runs, fingerprints of time. These scans revealed almost nothing: perfect surfaces, perfect ink distribution, perfect alignment. Layla felt the hair along her arms rise. Too perfect. Again. She stepped closer to the image, searching for micro-irregularities she knew should appear. Then, at the lower left corner of a folio, she saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible halo around a diacritical dot. Not a stylistic mark, a residue, a digital one. Her breath hitched. She leaned in, squinting. Yes. There it was again on another page, at the exact same coordinates, same depth, same diffusion pattern, a cloning artifact, pressed into place by someone who thought no human eye would ever catch it. Layla closed her eyes, steadying herself. She had seen enough forged reconstructions during her graduate years to recognize the signature of lazy duplication. Time never repeated itself with that kind of symmetry. Only modern replication did. When she opened her eyes, the sheikh was watching her, reading the shift in her breathing like a question waiting to be answered. "What did you find?" he asked. Layla moved her hand gently toward the projection, not touching it, just close enough to cast a shadow over one of the duplicated halos. "This," she whispered. The consultant stiffened. Too sharply, she pointed out the second halo. "And this." The room inhaled. The consultants rushed to speak. Artifacts from scanning, compression noise, meaningless. But their voices were too tight, too rehearsed. Layla didn't look at them. She looked at the sheikh. "I think these pages aren't just forged," she said softly. "I think they were composited." The sheikh stilled. His entourage shifted, nervous, uncertain, sensing the air beginning to twist. The consultant scrambled. "Your Excellency, she is catastrophizing. Let us proceed to the contract. Once you see the legal protections, this entire—" "Enough," the sheikh said mildly. And the room froze. Layla felt the gravity shifting toward her, terrifying and inevitable. She could feel Part 8 forming inside her, the precise moment she would no longer be able to stay silent. Sometimes the truth gathers so much pressure that silence becomes impossible. The room felt smaller now, as if the marble walls themselves were leaning in, waiting for her to either collapse or rise. Layla's breath trembled in her chest, but her eyes stayed fixed on the projection, on the duplicated halos she could no longer pretend were compression noise or harmless accidents. The sheikh moved the folio toward him as though proximity itself might clarify truth. "Explain what you mean by composited," he said. Layla stepped forward, the weight of 1,000 fears pressing against her ribs. "When someone forges a manuscript by hand," she said softly, "they introduce their own imperfections, their tremors, their biases, their habits." She pointed again to the faint halos. "But when someone reconstructs a manuscript digitally, before transferring it onto aged vellum, tiny duplications appear. The same pixel behaviors, the same edge diffusion, the same ghosting patterns." She swallowed. "These pages were built, not written." The consultants burst into manufactured laughter, but it rang out hollow, the performance of men who suddenly needed noise to cover the sound of truth cracking open. "Your Excellency," the angular one said sharply, "this is nonsense. We have the vellum, the ink age verification." "Age verification can be faked," Layla said, quietly. Not aggressively, not challengingly, just stating a fact. The angular consultant's jaw tightened. "And I suppose you will tell us how?" Layla hesitated only a second. "Ink can be embedded into old vellum using diffusion baths. The substrate ages naturally, but the script is new. Plain language, plain danger." The sheikh's pen, still lying on the contract, seemed suddenly radioactive. Layla saw the moment he understood. This wasn't about aesthetic anomalies. This was about engineered deception. Financial, reputational, historical. The second consultant stepped forward, voice lower, more urgent. "Your Excellency, we can waste the entire night entertaining the fantasies of an underpaid waitress, or we can finalize the acquisition of a once-in-a-lifetime collection, protected by airtight contracts." Layla heard the shift immediately, the fear in his voice. She took a step back, heart pounding. Something was wrong, not on the pages, not in the images, but in their eagerness to reach the contract. They weren't afraid of losing the manuscript sale. They were afraid of losing the terms. Her pulse throbbed in her neck. She turned slowly to the sheikh. "You should read the fine print before they turn another page." That sentence changed the air. The consultants froze, as if she had stepped directly onto the buried wire they prayed she wouldn't find. The sheikh's gaze sharpened. "Bring me the contract." As the folio slid toward him, Layla felt her stomach twist. This was it. The threshold she had hoped someone else might cross. But no one did. And now the weight of the entire room tilted toward her. The sheikh opened the contract. Layla saw the first hidden anomaly almost instantly. Her breath left her body. Sometimes the truth doesn't reveal itself. Sometimes it waits, until the precise moment you can no longer walk away. The sheikh rested one palm on the thick ivory pages, the embossed header catching the chandelier's light like a quiet warning. The consultant stood close, too close, hovering with predatory anticipation, like men who needed momentum more than honesty. He began reading, and Layla watched his eyes move line by line, unaware that danger had been braided meticulously into the paragraphs, disguised in elegant legalese. The angular consultant leaned in. "Your Excellency, the bulk of the contract is standard. Acquisition terms, chain of custody, escrow conditions. Nothing unusual. We've highlighted the sections requiring your signature." Highlighted. Layla stiffened. Predators highlight only what they want you to see. The sheikh turned a page, pen in hand. Layla's pulse hammered against her ribs. She scanned the text from where she stood, reading upside down, training kicking in. Syntax, spacing, contract structure, clause hierarchy. She caught it immediately. A shift in sub-paragraph numbering, a recursive reference, an internal loop. Her stomach dropped. That was not a mistake. That was architecture. She stepped forward. "Your Excellency, stop." The consultants whipped around, fury tightening their faces. The angular one nearly snarled. "This is beyond inappropriate. Remove her." No one moved. The sheikh didn't lift his pen. "What did you see this time?" Layla swallowed hard. Her voice trembled once but held. "Clause 4.3, the indemnity section." She pointed with a shaking finger. "The language reverses liability." The sheikh narrowed his eyes. "In what way?" "Plain language truth. Clear, soft, devastating." "If the manuscript is proven fake," she said, "you become responsible for proving that the sellers knew it was fake." She inhaled. "And the clause defines proof as documentation controlled by them." The sheikh froze. The consultants blanched. She continued, voice gaining steadiness. "That means even if the manuscript collapses under forensic authentication, you still lose. Automatically. The contract forces you to pay damages for defamation, breach of acquisition confidence, and reputational harm." Her throat tightened. "You would owe them more money than the manuscript is even worth." The room went cold. The second consultant lunged verbally, voice cracking. "She is misinterpreting advanced commercial language." Layla spoke over him, not loudly but cleanly. "The loop in Clause 7 cross-references back to 4.3. It makes the indemnity self-binding." A breath. "That is not advanced. That is predatory." The sheikh looked down at the page again, and Layla saw the precise second he realized she was right. He set the pen down, slowly, very slowly. The consultants broke. One stepped toward him with frantic urgency. "Your Excellency, she does not understand this type of agreement." Layla's voice sliced the room open. "Then why does the indemnity section also prohibit you from consulting any external forensic expert for 72 hours after discovery of irregularities?" The consultants froze. That was the kill shot. A clause that blocked independent authentication. A clause that only existed if fraud was expected. Layla felt her hands shaking, but she held her ground. The sheikh exhaled, the sound deep and dangerous. He closed the contract with a soft thud. And for the first time since she entered the room, everyone understood. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't lucky. She was the only person in the room not performing. The sheikh turned his gaze to her, no longer cautious, but commanding. "Explain everything," he said. "Sometimes the moment you fear most is the one your entire life has been preparing you to survive." Layla stepped closer to the table, each footfall feeling like it carried the weight of her entire abandoned academic career. The consultants backed away by instinct, as if proximity to her clarity was now dangerous. The sheikh sat perfectly still, hands folded, gaze sharpened into something that made even his entourage straighten. "Start from the beginning," he said. "Everything you saw." Layla inhaled, grounding herself. Her voice came out steady, controlled, almost forensic. "The first anomaly was visual," she said. "Microscopic haloing around repeated diacritical dots. That only happens when a digital source is cloned and reapplied. It means the manuscript pages weren't written. They were composited digitally, then transferred onto aged vellum." The second consultant snapped. "You cannot prove that with the naked eye." Layla continued as if he hadn't spoken. "The vellum is old," she said. "Older than the writing. That's why your ink tests passed." Someone scraped an ancient blank folio, then applied new script. That technique is known, crude, expensive, but known. The sheikh's jaw tightened. And the marginalia. They echo the main script too perfectly, she said. Different centuries never write with identical muscle memory. Yet here, every decorative sweep matches the original hand, down to pressure inconsistencies. That's impossible unless the forger copied and pasted motifs before transferring them. The angular consultant tried to interrupt again, but the sheikh raised one finger. Silence. Layla moved to the contract next. The legal trap is layered, she said, opening the folio. Clause 4.3 creates a liability reversal. Clause 7 loops back into it, making the reversal self-enforcing. And Clause 9.2, here, prohibits external forensic consultation for 72 hours. She paused, letting the sheikh absorb it. That windows the entire scheme, she continued softly, because a modern composite won't survive a proper spectral analysis. But delaying you for 3 days ensures the sellers vanish before authentication is performed. The consultant stiffened. That was the architecture, the design, the timing. Layla lifted one more page. And this, she said, tapping the paragraph. A damages clause tied to public disclosure of disputed authenticity, meaning, if you warn anyone that the manuscript might be fake, even while investigating, you owe them financial penalties. The sheikh stared at the text as if seeing it for the first time. It was never a manuscript sale, Layla said. It was a reputational blackmail structure disguised as one. A single drop of silence fell across the room. The consultant's breathing grew shallow, cornered men sensing the walls tightening. Layla looked at the sheikh, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. They designed this to make you pay even if you discovered the fraud. Especially if you discovered it. The sheikh leaned back in his chair, the chandelier's reflection sliding across his features like a cold blade. I see, he murmured. Layla felt her knees tremble, but she stayed upright. Because this was the moment her entire invisible life had been orbiting without her knowing. Sometimes truth doesn't defeat a lie. Sometimes it simply unmasks it, and the lie collapses on its own weight. The consultants looked cornered now, their slick confidence stripped away, leaving only the frantic calculation of men trying to determine whether escape was still possible. The sheikh's entourage shifted subtly, forming a quiet perimeter. Not hostile, not yet, but alert. The sheikh closed the contract with deliberate calm. There is more, he said to Layla. I can feel it in the way you're standing. Layla's breath caught. He was right. She had held back one detail, one she hadn't dared articulate because of how deeply it undercut everything the consultants had built. She stepped to the far page of the contract and traced a line with her fingertip. This, she whispered, Clause 10.4. The angular consultant lunged verbally, voice cracking. Your Excellency, that clause is administrative. No, Layla said, quiet but absolute. It's structural. She read aloud, slowly, letting each word find its place in the air. In the event of contested provenance, the buyer agrees to relinquish any retained digital reproductions, partial scans, or supporting analytical materials to the seller's custodian for the purpose of chain of custody restoration. She lowered the page. That is the heart of the scheme. The sheikh frowned. Explain. Layla swallowed. It means that if you suspect fraud, you must hand over every digital image, every scan, every photograph you took of the manuscript. She paused. In other words, you would be required to delete the evidence. A razor slice of silence. The sheikh's expression hardened, not in anger, but in realization. Layla continued, her voice gaining a terrible clarity. Once you surrender the digital reproductions, you cannot prove the manuscript is fake. And without proof, the reversal clause forces you to pay damages. They engineered the contract so that discovering the truth traps you deeper. Plain language, plain consequence. If you doubt the manuscript, they win, Layla said. If you authenticate it, they win. If you expose it, they win more. The second consultant finally snapped. Your Excellency, she is twisting legal language. This is standard chain of custody protocol. No, Layla said softly. Standard protocol never requires evidence to be destroyed. The sheikh looked at the consultants, really looked, and suddenly their posture, their sweat, their broken rhythm told a story louder than any forensic proof. He turned back to Layla. Why would they need me to delete the images? Layla met his gaze. Because the forgery is good, exceptionally good, but it won't survive the scrutiny of a real institute. A philologist would see the rhythm. A paleographer would see the repetition. A forensic lab would see the digital residue under the ink. She breathed once, steadying the truth she had to deliver. Everything in this room was built to make you sign first and understand later. The sheikh closed the contract with a soft, final sound. The consultants felt the shift in the air. One of them took an involuntary step back. Layla sensed it too, the collapse beginning, the unraveling of their careful architecture. Sometimes the most dangerous clauses are the ones written to look harmless. The room now felt like the inside of a pressure chamber, quiet, sealed, waiting for something to rupture. The consultants had lost their choreography entirely. Their suits seemed to hang heavier on their bodies, as if guilt added weight. Small beads of sweat traced the edges of their hairlines. Their confidence, once polished to perfection, had become brittle, cracking in real time. The sheikh leaned back in his chair, elbows on the armrests, hands steepled beneath his chin. A posture not of fury, but of judgment, a man calculating consequences. Let me ask you something, he said, his tone cool and level. If I had signed this contract, what would have happened next? The room went dead still. Layla answered before the consultants could twist the narrative. Once the ink dried, they would have triggered the escrow release. The funds, 280 million, would transfer immediately. She pointed to Clause 3.1. There's a subclause that bypasses standard waiting periods, an acceleration provision. The sheikh exhaled slowly. And after that? Layla met his eyes, steady, quiet, unforgiving. They would alert you, subtly, to a new analysis, suggesting an irregularity. Not enough to invalidate the sale, just enough to push you into the liability loop. She tapped Clause 4.3. You would be forced to open an internal verification process without external experts. A beat. And that process is designed to fail. One of the consultants broke. Your Excellency, we never would have... The sheikh raised a hand. He didn't even look at the man. Silence dropped like a curtain. Layla continued. When the internal verification fails, you would be required, by Clause 10.4, to turn over all digital scans. Her voice lowered, and the moment you did, any remaining evidence of forgery disappears. The sheikh's jaw tightened, and then they accuse me of defamation. Layla nodded once. For speaking of irregularities you can no longer prove. Her gaze drifted to the consultants. They would sue. They would win. And you would pay damages for exposing the fraud they engineered. The consultants' faces went ashen. The sheikh turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing. You expected me to make the fraud public. The angular consultant's voice cracked. Your Excellency, that is not... You wanted him to defend himself, Layla said softly, because the moment he did, he'd lose. That line landed like a blade. The second consultant stepped back, knocking into the edge of a leather chair. His voice came out in a panicked whisper. "This is absurd! You're letting a waitress fabricate a conspiracy." "She saw what you hoped no one in this room could read," the sheikh said, finally turning to them. His voice carried the quiet devastation of a man who had just mapped the entire architecture of betrayal. "And you underestimated her." Layla lowered her gaze, the weight of her invisibility suddenly unbearable. She never wanted this spotlight, never wanted this battle. She only wanted to stop a mistake, a catastrophic one. But the truth had momentum now, a force of its own. The sheikh's eyes returned to the contract. He closed the folio, pressing his palm against it as if sealing a coffin. "Destroying the evidence," he murmured. "Reversing liability. Penalties for speaking the truth." He looked at the consultants with a calm so sharp it pierced the room. "This wasn't a manuscript sale," he said. "This was entrapment." And that was the moment the consultants finally broke, their shoulders collapsing, their breath catching, their masks dissolving. Sometimes a lie doesn't explode. Sometimes it simply stops holding itself together. The consultant's collapse was not dramatic. It was subtle, almost anticlimactic. Two men who had built an empire of confidence suddenly stripped of the one asset their scheme depended on: control of the narrative. The angular one tried first to salvage it. He straightened his jacket, smoothed his tie, lifted his chin as if posture alone could rebuild the illusion. "Your Excellency," he began, voice low and urgent, "I believe there has been a profound misunderstanding. These clauses," the sheikh didn't even turn toward him, "if you lie again, I will know." A simple sentence, delivered in a tone that held no heat, no threat, no visible anger, and yet it made the consultant flinch like he'd been struck. Layla felt an ache in her chest at the sight, not pity, but the heavy recognition of a truth she'd learned long ago. Powerful men did not need volume to dismantle someone. Precision was always enough. The second consultant, younger, more nervous, tried a different tactic: appeasement. "Your Excellency, we can revise the contract. Remove the clauses that concern you. We meant no—" "You meant everything," Layla said quietly. He froze. Her voice wasn't loud, but it slid into the space between them with surgical accuracy. "Every clause fits the same architecture," she continued, stepping closer to the table. "The acceleration of funds, the evidence surrender, the defamation penalties, the liability reversal." Her finger hovered over the embossed header of the contract. "You didn't build this in a week. You didn't build it for one collector. You've used this structure before." The consultants exchanged a silent, panicked glance. That was the confirmation. Not verbal, not explicit, but raw. Layla inhaled sharply. This was bigger than a single forged manuscript. It was a repeatable legal trap, beautifully engineered, devastatingly simple, and almost impossible to catch unless someone could read both the script and the strategy. The sheikh rose from his seat. The entire room shifted, energy tightening like a wire pulled taut. His entourage stepped forward but stopped when he lifted a hand. He didn't need protection, he needed answers. He approached the consultants slowly, a quiet storm wrapped in tailored fabric. "Tell me," he said, voice controlled. "How many buyers have you targeted with this?" They said nothing. The sheikh tilted his head slightly, studying them the way one studies a painting with a hidden defect. "You won't speak because speaking is incriminating. Silence is safer for men like you." Layla watched them crumble, shoulders sinking, breath shallow, eyes darting toward the exit as if escape were still an option. It wasn't. Not in this room. Not with this man. Not after what she had revealed. The sheikh turned back toward her, and for the first time, she saw not curiosity or caution or assessment in his gaze, but gratitude wrapped in something far heavier: "You saved me," he said, barely above a whisper. Layla shook her head instinctively. "No, I only noticed what others ignored." The Sheikh's eyes softened in a way she had not expected, an expression without title, without rank, without the armor of wealth. For a moment he looked not like a billionaire, but like a man who had nearly walked willingly into a ruin disguised as opportunity. "If you hadn't spoken," he murmured, "my signature would already be drying." Layla lowered her gaze. Her voice trembled. "I wasn't supposed to speak." "But you did," he replied, "and that changed everything." Behind them, the consultants stood motionless, silent, cornered, waiting for consequences they no longer had the power to redirect. The unraveling had begun. Sometimes the fall of powerful men doesn't make a sound until someone finally listens to the quietest voice in the room. The sheikh returned to his seat, but the air did not settle. It thickened, heavy, expectant, charged with the kind of hush that precedes irreversible decisions. The consultants stood rigid, caught between panic and calculation, their minds clearly racing for an exit that no longer existed in any direction. Layla remained near the projection screen, hands lightly clasped, eyes lowered. She looked like someone absorbing shock, not from danger, but from the sudden weight of being heard after years of living in the margins. The sheikh tapped a finger slowly against the closed contract, the sound soft but deadly. "I want you to walk me through one final thing," he said to Layla. "Not the manuscript, not the clauses. The intention." Layla hesitated. "You already know the intention." "Yes," he said, "but I want to hear you articulate it." The consultant stiffened. Layla stepped forward, as if pulled by something deeper than courage, something like responsibility. Her voice was almost a whisper at first, but clarity strengthened every word. "They built a structure that uses your love of history against you." She paused. "They knew collectors of your caliber don't just buy artifacts. They buy narratives, legacy, permanence, the illusion of touching the past." She lifted the contract. "This document weaponizes that desire." The sheikh listened without blinking. "The forgery pulls you in," she continued. "The contract locks you down, and the penalties ensure you can't speak without paying a price for the truth." She set the contract down gently. "That is the intention." A long silence followed. No one dared breathe. Then the sheikh finally spoke, voice low and resonant. "So they rely on men like me being so certain of our authority that we stop questioning." Layla nodded once. "Yes." The consultants looked at the floor. The sheikh leaned back, thinking, processing. And then, very slowly, he turned to his entourage. "Send the contract," he said, "to our legal team." Both consultants jerked their heads up in alarm. "No, Your Excellency, let us clarify, let us—" But the sheikh had already raised his hand. They went silent instantly. The entourage member closest to him stepped forward and accepted the folio. The sheikh added, "And send copies of these manuscript scans to the Institute in Cairo." Layla's breath caught, shocked. He was escalating. He was validating her. And he was inviting independent, unforgiving scrutiny, the very thing the consultants had structured the entire trap to avoid. The angular consultant snapped, unable to contain himself. "You cannot externalize the scans. There are confidentiality agreements, chain of custody." The sheikh turned his gaze toward him with the calm of a blade lying flat on a table. "Your clauses don't bind me," he said. "I did not sign." The consultant's mouth snapped shut. Layla felt a tremor rush through her. The collapse wasn't just beginning, it had fully arrived. The sheikh addressed his team again. Inform the board that the acquisition attempt was fraudulent. His eyes locked on the consultants. And that these men attempted to entrap me. The consultants paled, horror blooming across their carefully maintained composure. Layla watched the truth take shape in the room. The architecture of the trap was exposed, the contract was now evidence, and the men who designed it no longer controlled the story. She exhaled slowly. Sometimes exposure doesn't arrive like lightning. Sometimes it happens when one man finally decides to stop pretending. The consultants were unraveling now, one gripping the back of a leather chair as if it could anchor him, the other blinking rapidly, throat constricting with the realization that their polished world had begun to tilt beyond recovery. The elegant dining suite, once their stage, had become the site of their unmasking. The sheikh watched them with a stillness that was almost surgical. No raised voice, no threats, just the quiet gravity of a man who had seen the contour of betrayal clearly enough to no longer need anger. But Layla sensed the story wasn't finished. Not yet. The sheikh gestured to his entourage. "Bring me the portfolio," he said. An assistant retrieved a slim black folder, the consultant's own curated presentation of provenance documents, authentication certificates, chain of custody declarations. Layers and layers of polished deception. He opened the first document. Layla, from where she stood, saw it instantly. The asymmetry in the seal impression, the ink saturation inconsistent with 19th century customs, the micro-blurring along the signature line. A forgery supporting a forgery. The sheikh looked at her. "Do you see what I see?" Layla stepped forward, careful, reverent, as if approaching the echo of a life she once prayed to belong to. She leaned in and examined the seal. "It's a digital imprint pressed onto new wax," she whispered. "The outer ring is perfect, but the inner ridges don't show compression. That happens when someone prints a surface texture instead of creating it." Plain language, plain danger. The sheikh lifted the page and held it against the light. The faintest shimmer, too consistent, too uniform, ran across the signature. A printer gloss, not oxidized ink. He placed the page down gently, as one might place a lie to rest. The consultants panicked. "You're misinterpreting proprietary watermarking. This is standard in archival transfers. This is all a misunderstanding." But their words collapsed under their own desperation. Layla turned the next page. Her breath hitched. A chain of custody log, allegedly written by a European curator in the 1970s. But the syntax carried modern phrasing, the date format followed a digital database standard, and the cursive was lifted from a font library she recognized from her graduate research. "This isn't even a human hand," she said softly. "It's a scripted typeface designed to imitate cursive. A composite signature." The sheikh looked at the consultants one last time. What did you think would happen?" he murmured. "When you tried to rewrite history in front of someone who spent her life reading it." The angular consultant broke. "This is a business model. People pay for narrative, not purity. These things happen all the time." A fatal slip. The sheikh's voice dropped to a quiet, lethal register. A business model. Not a mistake. Not an oversight. A strategy. The room went still enough to hear the vibrations of the city beyond the glass. Layla realized then that the men hadn't simply forged a manuscript. They had forged an industry around the assumption that no one would ever look too closely. But someone had. A waitress, an immigrant, a scholar who never got to finish her degree. A woman they dismissed with a smirk and a dialect-laced insult. The sheikh closed the portfolio and folded his hands. "Escort them out," he said. His entourage moved, quiet, controlled, decisive. The consultants didn't protest. They couldn't. They no longer had a story to stand on. As the doors shut behind them, the room exhaled. Layla stood there, hands trembling, heart thundering. But finally, free of the crushing fear she'd carried since the moment she'd whispered, "Do not sign." The sheikh turned to her. "You didn't just protect my name," he said softly. "You protected my legacy." Her throat tightened. Sometimes the final turn of the knife is not the wound, but the moment the blade is returned to its rightful owner. The suite felt different now, emptier, wider, as if the removal of two men had created new oxygen in the room. But for Layla, the air didn't ease. If anything, the quiet made her more aware of her own trembling. She had spent years training herself not to take up space, not to draw attention, not to speak unless spoken to. Now, the most powerful man in the room was looking at her as if she were the only person who had ever spoken the truth to him. The sheikh approached her, not with dominance, not with intimidation, but with the careful gravity of someone approaching a person who had just stepped out of fire. "You saved me from a very costly mistake," he said. Layla shook her head, voice small. I only recognized what I used to study." "What you used to study," he repeated. She stilled. This was the part she never wanted to explain, the part that made her chest tighten, that shrank her every time she remembered what she lost. "I was a doctoral candidate," she said softly. "Manuscript forensics, philology, codicology. But I lost my scholarship when the funding shifted, and without it, I couldn't stay. Visa issues, debt. One thing unraveled the next. A pause. I started working wherever I could." The sheikh listened without interruption, without pity, only understanding, a quality far more difficult to bear. "You were never meant to be invisible," he said. Layla lowered her gaze. "Invisibility keeps people like me safe." He studied her posture, her restraint, the quiet hesitation in her voice. "Did you ever stop reading manuscripts?" She almost smiled. "Almost." "No. I read them on my phone at night. Free scans. Anything I could find. And still," he said, "your eye outperformed trained consultants." "Because forgery always leaves a rhythm," she whispered. "Even the best fabricators can't mimic the unconscious muscle habits of centuries. You can't fake the breath of the hand." A long silence settled between them. The sheikh finally spoke. "You said something earlier about them using my love of history against me." He paused. "You understood that because history means something to you too." Layla's chest tightened. She nodded once. "It does," she whispered. "It always did." He gestured toward the contract, now sealed as evidence. "You prevented a loss larger than money." She felt heat rise behind her eyes. Not tears, but a bewildering mix of relief, exhaustion, and the sudden realization that for the first time in years, someone believed her. A soft knock came at the door. One of the entourage leaned in. "Your Excellency, legal confirms all clauses constitute structured entrapment. They request full documentation." "Give it to them," the sheikh said. The man nodded and withdrew. As the door closed again, the sheikh's voice softened. "You will not return to clearing plates after tonight." Layla's breath caught. I don't know what you mean." "I mean," he said gently, "that you have just redirected $250 million, dismantled a professional fraud structure, and exposed a legal trap built to ensnare powerful men. Don't pretend that's ordinary." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "I didn't do it for anything. I know," he said. "And that is why it matters." The chandelier's reflection pooled over the marble like spilled gold, bathing the room in a quiet that felt newly earned. Layla didn't feel triumphant. She felt unmoored, because the truth was settling in. She had changed the fate of someone powerful, and in doing so, she had changed her own. Sometimes the aftermath is heavier than the danger, because it asks who you are, now that you are no longer hidden. The sheikh remained silent for a moment, studying Layla as if weighing futures instead of merely options. The marble table, the emptied chairs, the abandoned glasses, they all felt like remnants of an earlier version of this room. A version where she had been only a shadow, moving between courses. Now the room revolved around her. "Sit," he said softly. Layla hesitated. No one had ever spoken that word to her gently. But she obeyed, lowering herself onto a chair near the corner of the table. She sat carefully, as if afraid her presence might still be questioned. The sheikh placed the forged folio between them. "There will be consequences for those men," he said. "Legal ones, reputational ones. But that is a matter for tomorrow." He leaned forward slightly. "Tonight is about you." Layla felt her pulse stutter. "Me? You dismantled a multi-layered fraud with nothing but your eyes," he said. "And you did it quietly, without seeking credit, without expecting protection." He paused. "That is rare." She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to disappear again, to shrink back into the safety of quiet corridors and predictable paychecks. Another part, small, bruised, but alive, wanted to believe him. The sheikh opened a leather-bound notebook and slid it toward her. Inside was a card, embossed with the seal of an institution she knew all too well. The Arab Institute for Manuscript Integrity. Her breath caught. Her chest tightened. It was the place she had once dreamed of applying to, before everything in her life began to collapse. "They have an opening," he said. "A role suited for someone with your eye. Someone who knows how to read what most people overlook." Layla stared at the card as if it might vanish. "I'm not officially qualified anymore." "You are more qualified than anyone who nearly convinced me to sign tonight," he said. "And that should tell you something." She swallowed hard. "I don't know if they would accept." "They will," he said simply, "because I will recommend you personally." Her mind spun, fear, disbelief, hope, all crashing into one another. The life she had built, small, quiet, invisible, had been the only one she knew how to survive. The life he was describing felt unreal, like a door opening into the future she'd once shut permanently. "I don't want charity," she whispered. He almost smiled. "This is not charity. This is placement of talent where it belongs." Her eyes burned, not with tears, but with the unbearable sensation of being seen too clearly. "And if I'm not ready?" she asked softly. "Then they will wait," he said. "But I do not think waiting is your path." Layla looked down at her hands, slender, calloused from months of carrying trays, but still the same hands that once traced 9th century ink strokes with reverence. "I was nobody in this room," she whispered. "No," he replied. "You were invisible. There is a difference." He stood, signaling the end of the night, but not the ending of her story. "Take the card," he said, "and when you're ready, rewrite the life that was taken from you." The card felt impossibly light in her fingers. Sometimes opportunity doesn't knock. Sometimes it speaks in a quiet room and asks you who you are when no one is looking. The Institute's reading room glowed in the amber light of late afternoon, dust motes drifting like slow-moving constellations above rows of manuscripts. Layla sat at a long wooden table, white gloves on, her posture steady, her breath calm. Before her lay a vellum folio awaiting authentication. Nothing dangerous this time, nothing weaponized. Just history, waiting to be understood. Her badge lay beside her, senior forensic analyst. Sometimes she touched it without meaning to, as if confirming it was real. In the past 12 months, her life hadn't become glamorous. It had become solid. Rent paid on time, a workspace of her own, a team that listened, and a quiet recognition that spread not through loud praise but through trust earned one page, one ink test, one pattern at a time. She still walked softly, but she no longer tried to disappear. Occasionally, a sealed envelope from the sheikh arrived at the institute. Polite updates, a thank you note, a formal recognition of her contribution to preventing a massive entrapment scheme. She never replied more than a sentence or two. He never expected more. Some nights she stayed late in the reading room, the city humming faintly beyond the tall windows. She would study a script, trace a margin flourish, memorize the breath of a long-gone hand. And she felt, finally, aligned with the life she'd once believed was no longer available to her. A quiet truth settled in her chest. Being invisible had protected her, but stepping into the light had saved her.